people moving in and out. So that's perfect. So welcome everyone. My name is Borsika Rabin, and I am here with my wonderful colleague, Ms. Clare Viglione, who is going to be providing us with a nice overview of a review that we have been undertaking over the past year to spark some discussion and thinking around how to conduct dissemination and implementation science capacity building, but even more broadly, creating programs around dissemination and implementation science capacity building and pragmatic research. So our plan is that Clare is going to share our methods for this review and some initial findings. And then we are going to open this up for broader discussion with all of your contributions and thoughts. Feel free to use the chat function to add your thoughts and questions throughout the presentation. And then after the brief presentation, we will have an opportunity to have a discussion, hopefully very informally. So thank you for being here. And I would like to a little bit more formally introduce Ms. Clare Viglione. Clare is the Center Manager for the UCSD ACTRI Dissemination and Implementation Science Center. She is also a clinician and works with us on dissemination and implementation science work, in addition to, I think, still maintaining some clinical work. So she brings multiple perspectives. Clare, thank you so much for accepting to present today, and I will hand this over to you.
Thank you so much, Borsika. All right, let's get started. So building a little bit of context for today, again, I'm representing the newly established UC San Diego Altman Clinical and Translational Research Institute Dissemination Implementation Science Center, better known as DISC here at UCSD. And our ambitious mission is to establish UCSD as a nationally and internationally recognized flagship for D&I science through training, technical assistance, and research advancement. And our ultimate vision is to enhance UCSD's public health impact locally and globally through D&I science. And we're funded through an internal investment through UCSD Health, a 3-year initial funding investment. And we're administratively housed within Altman Clinical Translational Research Institute, which is our CTSA funded program here at UCSD, to facilitate collaboration and linkages across departments and across UCSD Health Sciences. A short plug here, we encourage you to visit our website, disc.ucsd.edu. Become a DISC member, just a short 2 to 3 minute survey to become a DISC member. It's free at this time to join our DISC community and stay up to date with our news and events, our journal club meetings. We have various kind of free offerings, trainings and workshops, as well as our web-based D&I tools and resources. So now I'll pivot to focus on this D&I capacity building project and initiative that we've undertaken at the DISC. So centers focused on D&I training, mentorship, and capacity building have proliferated nationally and internationally in recent years. And through this project, it's actually been quite interesting to see how much implementation science there is around the world, but using different terminology. So instead of D&I science or pragmatic science, knowledge exchange, knowledge translation, knowledge delivery is used in Canada and the UK and around the world. So there's a lot of work in this area. But to our knowledge, there's yet to be a comprehensive inventory of US and international based centers and programs, cataloging information about activities, infrastructure, and priority areas. So our project seeks to identify and describe an exhaustive list of centers and build a compendium of strategies to bolster discrete D&I capacity building efforts, both locally on the ground within the institutions and to share these learnings across organizations. So there's growing research in this area, and here's some of the publications to date that are describing and exploring different ways of building capacity in D&I, types of resources offered across programs. There's an article here about building D&I competencies specifically in graduate programs. But we'd love to hear from you. What are we missing? What other publications or products might be out there that we're missing? Feel free to drop them in the chat to help sort of inform our work. So we divided our search process into two distinct phases. Phase one involved a pilot test of our processes, as well as the dissemination of our D&I capacity building survey, whereas phase two focused on this advanced algorithmic Google search, which I'll get to in a moment, to identify a more exhaustive list of centers. Phase one programs were identified primarily by searching NIH Reporter for funded centers. And we looked at CTSAs, where we captured quite a few D&I programs embedded within the CTSA or CTSI programs, P50 and Alacrity centers. We also consulted with D&I experts internally at UCSD and then also external to UCSD to identify any missing programs. And from this initial search, we had a kind of 140 programs and centers, and then did a web-based review of their websites and excluded 95 of those because they either didn't have a D&I element or component of their program, or didn't have one of these kind of activities that we describe as kind of qualifying it as a center, a program, or a training site. And 11 of these were duplicates. And from that initial identification, we narrowed our list of 33, and we sent our D&I capacity building survey to these 33 program administrators, and about a third of them responded. So this is our initial round of survey, and we have 11 respondents, and I'll share that information with you here. So briefly to recap, our methods for phase one primarily relied on this targeted review of NIH Reporter awarded centers, both NIMH and NCIP centers, for example, and a review of relevant CTSA sites through Google searches and expert recommendation to supplement. We systematically screened center and program websites for D&I activities and relevance, and we distributed a D&I capacity building survey to assess inputs, activities, and outputs using domains from the Bronson et al. 2017 D&I capacity building logic model. And here's the D&I capacity building logic model, which was adapted again from Bronson and colleagues' 2017 publication. And it's used as a guide for our quantitative and our qualitative capacity building measures for each site. Phase one focused on the left-hand column, the financial inputs, the human resource inputs, and the knowledge resource inputs, as well as assessing which activities that they had. And the activities here would include training, education, D&I mentorship, D&I consultation, the provision of grant development support or professional networking opportunities. And you can see others listed here, and then the associated output indicators. So how are these programs and centers measuring the success, or how are they measuring the outputs from their activities? And then our qualitative interviews, which we have yet to start, will focus on here in the orange box, our outcomes and impact, and kind of larger return on investment outcomes. And that includes some of these proximal outcomes: increased awareness and knowledge of D&I, expanded professional networks of D&I, collaborators, researchers, and practitioners, longer term increased community collaboration, shared network of D&I expertise, cross-campus collaboration. And an example of an impact item that we're going to be exploring is accelerated research or accelerated translation of research innovations into practice. And this table demonstrates some of the initial descriptive data abstracted from the websites for the 33 identified through phase one. And of the 33, 27 were based in the US and 6 were international. Most were academic affiliated, and of those, just over half were CTSA or associated with the CTSI programs at their institutions. And from the websites, they sort of broadly advertised a variety of activities and initiatives. So they were sort of robust programs seeming from their websites, offering training, education, mentorship, consultation. You can see here in the kind of the 70s to 80%. So most of the programs reported these, fewer reported providing resources and tools specific from their site. And then from the D&I capacity building survey to the 11, or to the 33 and then 11 subsequently responded, most of the data parallels what we found from the website. So 10 of 11 were based in the US and academic affiliated. We also, again, inquired about their organizational structure and their kind of human resources. And they were pretty well-staffed programs. 3.4 on average were the number of faculty affiliates with the program. 4.7 staff FTEs designated for the program on average. And then again, the D&I activities broadly described, training and education, mentorship, consultation here. Again, most sites, and fewer, 6 of the 11 reported professional networking opportunities. So some of our next steps, phase 2 is ongoing, which includes this more advanced algorithmic Google search. We've done an incognito Google search utilizing an exhaustive list of search terms, program, center, organization, entity, combining with every possible implementation science synonym that you can think of. And we have a list of 6,850 web pages exported from Google. And we're kind of combing through that list to come up with our broader, more comprehensive list of programs and centers globally. And phase 3 will include additional distribution of our survey and interviews with a subset of sites to examine those outcomes and impact and sort of the more meaningful longer term return on investment type measures from the capacity building logic model. Ultimately, we hope to collate this data into an online database of D&I programs with key descriptors that can be well utilized by program administrators, program leads, and then write up the summary of our findings and our process in a publication. And we hope to, and I think, complete phase 3 by summer and the start of fall 2021. So thank you very much for listening to my brief overview of our D&I capacity building project, and I'll pass it back to Dr. Borsika Rabin to lead us through a reflection and a discussion based on our work.
Thank you so much, Claire. Wonderful way of pulling together a long year of work. And as Claire indicated, we have more to do, especially these Google searches are challenging when you're trying to synthesize information about things that you usually don't publish on. Very few centers publish on their existence. It becomes relatively tricky to get them comprehensively identified. I appreciated Margaret Crane's recommendation about looking at the CERC training center list, and thank you so much, Margaret. We will definitely cross-check. In this review, we were trying to focus on more the programs, less just individual trainings, but I think that one way to do it, and I think that's what you are suggesting here, is to link to the programs and see whether there is a center or a program around them. So the training programs might identify additional centers, so thank you. We put up here some discussion questions, but we certainly don't have to follow these. First, I would like to encourage everyone who is in a position to turn on your camera. Feel free to engage with us in a very informal way and ask any questions. If you are not in a position, feel free to use the chat function to add in your questions. And I will wait for a few seconds here to see whether there are some general overarching questions or thoughts. And I know that some of you are actually having lunch because this is meant to be a lunch break in some ways. So that's understandable. But if you have anything to contribute, feel free to jump in with chat. And anyone with questions, please feel free to unmute yourself as well.
I guess this is more of a comment, but I love that you are doing this, and I love that you're taking a systematic approach to it. Increasingly in the literature, there's a call for this type of training, pragmatic research, real world situations. And sometimes they even specifically mention D&I, especially in the learning health system literature. So it's more of a comment. I think it's great, it's needed. So thanks for doing it.
Thank you so much, Katie, I appreciate it. Anyone else?
I also think this is really awesome. I'm one of CERC's student reps, and I know the students really love these sorts of lists. So I think it's wonderful that you're also considering an international context too, because I think it's harder for sometimes US folks to know about that. One question I had is whether or not you're looking at like VA centers separately, or how you're analyzing that.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Claire and I had a lot of discussions with our team about how to include the VA. And I actually wanted to, and thank you so much, Margaret, for kind of cueing this. I see some, I have seen some VA affiliated folks here, so I would love your guidance. We are thinking about reaching out to Dr. Kilborn and ask how she sees the query centers function, whether she sees those as individual centers or programs, or the entire query program is seen as the query-based D&I capacity building program. But I know that there are so many other things in the VA. So I will actually throw this out to others on the call, whether they have recommendations on where we could identify D&I focused or centers that have D&I as a substantial focus.
I don't have an answer to what you just asked, Borsika, but one question that came to my mind looking at just how many places you've already been able to identify, if you have any musings about the benefit of proliferation versus consolidation. Because it seems like when we take all of the centers and all of the great work they're doing and websites they're creating and lists, if that's the best way of serving sort of the pragmatic and implementation science community, or if consolidating those efforts into a more centralized hub would better serve us, and if so, what keeps us from being able to do that?
Cool, thank you so much. I think that that's one of our big cross-cutting questions, and I would like to see if Claire wants to share a few thoughts about this, and then also open it up more broadly to the group, because this is exactly the question that we hope that we could reflect on.
Thank you, Cole. I do agree that that's a wonderful question, and I think just from combing through websites, a lot of times it's hard to tell the extent to which this is like utilizing any sort of competency, or how are they really, training in D&I. And again, they sort of really broadly advertise that they do several different things, but how do you kind of know? And so, I would be curious about sort of consolidation efforts, but even more so sort of like, how do we kind of analyze and evaluate and cross-check each other's D&I efforts to ensure that what we're doing is sort of consistent and collaborative. But yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, anyone else reflecting on Cole's question about the lot of work that we do parallel to each other and not necessarily in a coordinated way? And then I see Margaret's comment about, we don't want to reinvent a wheel. We would like to obviously take advantage of the strength of different programs and build on those and not replicate necessarily in every single program. And I'm looking at Jody. I'm going to kind of read it for Jody. And Jody, if you are in a position, feel free to jump in and just say this as well. Do you catalog what kinds of specialty areas or strength within D&I are located where? This might help us know where to start within our field of where to go. For example, if I am interested in doing more work in sustainment, where do I go? Along with this, I wonder if there is a culture we could set across our centers of helping and supporting one another in developing this field. Yeah, no, I love that, Jody. I think the answer to your question is yes, we are including wherever we can. The survey certainly gets to that, and the interviews will. Whenever we can identify it on their website, we are highlighting their priority areas within D&I. method strength or strength in terms of topic areas or settings or populations. So our hope is that it will help with this cross-cutting checkout, where do we see potential collaboration opportunities and synergies. James indicates that Amy Kilborn would be a good place to start. And then there are differences between centers of excellence, MIRAC, and it's dedicated sections of DNI. So James, knowing that I have easy access to you, I might pick your brain more about this, and we might engage you in thinking through how we could list these.
Hi, I'd like to chime in. And I'm with the VA and have been involved with the implementation science. So VA in the US, I think, has been the forerunner, getting started with the whole concept of implementation science, and has grown wildly. So the query program has been focusing, and it was formed for implementation science. For the last few years, so the Health Services and Research Center, which is the umbrella and within it, query sits there within it. Even the proposals and the work going on health services research, they want a section in the proposal about implementation. So it's not just query, it's just the importance of it, the value of implementation is far and widespread. And David Atkins is the director for HSR&D, and Amy Kilborn is the director for the query program. So these are definitely two places. And when I've been involved since 2005, and when we got started, it was like found out that, oh, in Canada and Australia and UK, they are they've been doing this for years. They are well ahead of the curve. So that's, I think, where a lot of DNI work can be explored, and
Thank you so much, Anju. I really appreciate your perspective, and we'll definitely make a point of adding the VA pieces in a very purposeful way. And then the other piece is you're highlighting this international strength in DNI, whether it's UK, Canada, Australia, the WHO, or more broadly Europe. And we were able to identify some, but these programs are also, I think, differently named sometimes. So we are even more challenged in identifying them, even if we use the broad terminology. Yeah, so I'm also looking at some additional comments here. Mary, just a great point that we would want to know which of these centers or programs are focused mostly locally to create local capacity for their faculty, and which are the ones that are set up for local and national or regional support, because I think there is a difference. There are situations where it's mostly building the local academic institution-based capacity, but then there are ones who have the capacity to reach beyond. So I love that. Oh, these are great. Let me, and anyone please just unmute yourself and give us a very nice example and read it, because otherwise I am reading yours. Let's see.
I can jump in. This is Julia Moore. I was going to say, so I get questions every single week. Someone emails me and says, I want to become an implementation practitioner or researcher. Where can I get training to do that? Literally every week. Someone from Zimbabwe emailed me yesterday and said, what can I do in Africa to do this? And so I think that there is a desperate need to pull this together. I sent them the CERC things, but that had nothing listed in Africa. And so I think that there are ways we can take it to that next level. But then the reply was, but some of these are very topic specific and some are not. And I think this last point, some seem to train locally, some seem to train more broadly. And so I think that there's really a need to disentangle what some of those pieces are and who they will accept. Because even sometimes when things are open, it's only open to people who are in specific content areas or meet really specific criteria. And I think I've heard a lot of frustration lately from many different people around those criteria to get in. And so I think that really having those pieces laid out would be so helpful for the field, because there's people around the world who want to do this and they don't know where to go. Because I think the demand is much greater than the capacity is right now.
Thank you so much, Julia. And I would like to encourage everyone that after this session, you move on to Julia's presentation, where she's going to talk about the perspective of implementers, which I think has been another area of great interest for us to start to understand how differently we need to provide not just training, but technical assistance, resources, capacity building for folks who are not in the academic context. They are not interested in doing research. They want to implement. And so Julia has been a forerunner in this area internationally, and it will be wonderful to hear from her. To comment on your note, Julia, this review that we are doing now was limited to programs which are sometimes affiliated with training programs. Of an accompanying review that is being conducted by Amy Hipschman, and I'm involved with that, and some other colleagues from WashU, looks at specifically training programs for D&I internationally and in the US. So I think all of these will nicely come together for the field to provide resources. So I'm looking at, please.
Sorry, I wanted to make one more comment that NIH's D&I conference, which was held in December, and I think this was the 12th year they had it, and I've been attending most of them right from the beginning. I have been blown away, especially in the beginning years, to see so much collaboration, and there was so much representation from so many countries about the D&I work going over there. And like you said, this is a really growing field. So the terminologies were so different. And then when they started discussing, it's like, oh, you're talking about this. We call it differently here. But so I would suggest take a look at their archived work for the D&I conferences. And earlier they were being organized by NIH, and now Academy Health, I believe, is doing that. But there's a lot of interesting information which is shared in at that forum.
Wonderful idea. Thank you so much, Andrew. Really appreciate it.
I was just going to quickly make a comment that the Consortium of Universities for Global Health and Fogarty are also great resources, particularly for global programs. And I think it's true that they may not have established centers that are fully focused on D&I, but they have a lot of experience and contacts. And I think it's true that a lot of the offerings are for specific content areas. But I think there are some great resources for looking at kind of a more comprehensive list of the different D&I offerings, especially for low and middle income country contexts.
This is great. Meredith, may I bother you of putting the two organizations in the chat, and we will hopefully can save the chat because there is some great rich discussion here, but at a minimum we will take a photo of it. Thank you so much. I'm also looking at some back and forth a little bit. Jody asking about Dr. Holtrap, D&I training for implementation practice, and Julia might be in the best position to respond to that if she can come back on. She might be getting ready for her next presentation though. So Jody, I know that Julia has been working on more of a practice-focused implementation training, and she has a number of these types of workshops offered through her organization in Canada. And hopefully in the next presentation, she will specifically call out some of those, but otherwise I can send you her website, or we can put it in the chat where there is some information about that. Very nice. Well, great discussion. I'm trying to think whether we had until 45 after the hour. Claire, do you remember?
I think we have until noon. Or
very good. So Claire, did you have anything else that you placed in the chat that you wanted to share live?
I guess, I mean, one question that we were curious about as we were combing through all of these D&I centers and programs is that there's so many outside of like health and kind of traditional health, social services, educational fields. There's a lot of tech, a lot of business implementation science type programs. And so we're just curious, but we've included a lot of them, but it's interesting how we might categorize them or list them in our database. So just kind of thoughts around content areas of D&I programs.
Something that just struck me, I don't know if this is a variable that you're extracting from the characteristics of these centers. I like the idea of the one someone mentioned earlier about if folks native to the institution only can access it, or people outside the institution can access it, and also cost related things. Just because I know that can bring up barriers for certain people, depending on how much like the tuition would cost for a series or whatever. So I know that sort of information would be helpful before a person would drill down into a really promising resource, to know at the get-go, it has a small or medium or large price tag or freely available.
Good question, Cole. So for the D&I review that we do on trainings with Amy Hipschman, we have included the tuition rates. It was, of course, tricky how you compare it across programs. Is it by the course or credit hour or the full program? And what does that mean when you break it down? So I don't even remember, we are finalizing the tables, what we ended up with, whether it's a final program cost for getting the full, certification or whatever the end goal is. But Claire, could you remind me whether we ended up including any cost associated with accessing services for these programs? I think we were thinking about sustainment.
We included more, our overall survey was more about financial resources, like the investment into the programs or centers. And yeah, we were thinking about the angle of like the program administrators, the leaders, utilizing this information. But I think cost of accessing trainings and activities is important. And that's kind of why we have this next iteration. So perhaps we can add it.
That's great. Any other thoughts? I guess if you are willing to share, if you are part of a program like this, what the sustainment plan is for your program, that certainly was one of our kind of self-focused interest in doing this review, to understand how programs are able to continue to function. Most of these activities are not easy to fund through center grants, but there might be ways. And so if any of you are associated with this, please share, what is the main strategy? Is it internal funding? Are you going after, again, center grants, or how do you make it happen in your own organization?
Borsika, do you want me to just talk so you don't have to read more?
Judy, I would appreciate that so much. Thank you so much for coming on.
So University of Colorado, I assume you're talking about financial sustainment, so kind of a variety of sources. We do have a CCTSI, so that is one of them. So that is a bigger, longer term grant around translational research. So one area is the dissemination and implementation area, which Bethany Kwan heads, who leads this conference. But the main areas within our health services research center called Accords, and we get funding from the Children's Health Research Center and the School of Medicine, and this is kind of our main place to do health services delivery research. So and then we serve our campus, which so I think as long as those folks have some money and want to invest in us, we have some infrastructure, support, but of course there's center grants and other grants, that help support the activities that we do. So those are the main places for us, but it would always be nice to have more, not to be greedy, but, to have more, because a lot of the funding that we get is to serve as consultants for other people and to do training and development. So developing our own research interests and doing more, for the field is hard because people want, oh, I want to apply REAIM to my, to my K project. And that's great. And it's building capacity. So that's awesome. But, doing some of the more complicated and field moving stuff is where it's really difficult to have enough funding to do that. So I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for.
That is the exact answer, Jody. Thank you so much. I very much appreciate you sharing that you have to puzzle it together from different sources to make this happen. And there is always, every year, the question whether the funds will be arriving and how you can continue doing this work. And I think that that might be a pretty common experience, but I would love to hear if others have different kinds of models or similar models. And if it's not specific to DNI, that's fine. I would love to also hear of any other centers where you are able to function for many years with certain funding and support infrastructure. Well, let me try another question. And if you think of anything, feel free to drop it in the chat. The other question I would have is for those of you who are more benefiting from these programs and taking advantage of some of the services, would you share what do you find the most useful or most beneficial types of services for your own work?
I can jump in, Borsika. Honestly, the most valuable things for me are having a community of people like this to talk with. That has been sort of the most important thing for me. And it doesn't even need, I have formal mentoring, absolutely mentoring and educational offerings, but also just these sort of more informal, open conversations where we talk through things and talk through ideas and run things by each other. So I find that to be particularly supportive and useful.
Thank you so much, Bethany. That's great. And I think that I would agree that at UCSD, what made a big difference for me when we created the center, that I was all of a sudden connected with like-minded people on a daily basis. And I didn't have to find ways or make an extra effort to connect because we had those standing meetings now to talk about these issues and inspire each other. Let me see, Katie mentioned, oh, Erica, that would be great, please.
Oh yeah, I would just say, I think I totally agree with what Bethany said about having a network, but not just for like the general sort of like finding your implementation and D&I science tribe, so much as being able to have a network of people that you can get into some of the more complex and challenging methodological D&I questions, right? Like about how do you go about adaptations? How do you think about specifying measures or advancing the methodology on D&I measure? I just think like there's only so much self-teaching you can do, and there are so few opportunities, especially for younger investigators like myself, right? We don't necessarily have tons of programs where you can get a PhD in D&I. So we're hungry for more training and opportunities to engage. And I think that the DISC does that really well. The UC San Diego DISC does that really well, but also lots of other places as well. So thanks for that, Borsika.
Thank you so much, Erica, for sharing that. And what we have seen in our center, and I would love to hear from others, that as we grow in terms of the different types of expertise, Erica just recently joined us, Dr. Crable, and we are very excited to have her perspective and her interests infuse our discussions and educate us, even those of us who have been perhaps a little bit longer in the field. She brings the newer methodologies that she has tried out in her own work. So it's really a wonderful way for all of us to be excited about new topics and methods. And Katie mentioned here, Dr. Trinkley, that she also is seeking mentorship and educational offerings like COPRH. And then we have a number of wonderful agreements around COPRH being really useful. Danielle Ostendorf, Dr. Ostendorf mentions that for her, the DNI certificate has been helpful. We have a graduate certificate in Colorado, so my other hat, which we have really been blessed to have very, very bright, excited students attending the certificate classes and learning from them and with us has been a great adventure. And I know that Bethany is going to talk briefly about the certificate at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, Borsika, the weekly Accords meeting for the DNI group, just to see other researchers display their work in progress and to get input from other experts in the field. It's really helpful for me, especially as I write a grant, like to see someone else's specific aims page and how they pitch a DNI project and how they're working through different issues. Because this area is so complex, it's not very straightforward, and to have that feedback from a lot of people is just so helpful.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I agree. So we have another 5 minutes, and I would like to allow us to go in whatever direction you all would like to. But I just wanted to summarize that what I have heard so far, that most of you find the core, one of the core functions of these capacity building activities is the connection with others and the opportunity to discuss these issues in a safe and engaged way. And I think that certainly will be reflected in our paper. I am going to ask Claire to make a note for us to think about that, and in our interviews to further explore how different programs provide this platform for the members of the program to interact with each other. Any other questions or thoughts that came to you as we were discussing these program centers, the review, anything else?
I have a question. I'm wondering, and I apologize, I had to join late because I had a meeting conflict, but this is so cool and I can't wait to keep learning about your work. I'm wondering, in my experience, a lot of DNI centers, because of the way they're funded by their own school, sort of their first task is to enhance DNI capacity amongst their own investigators, their own students. How much are DNI centers at different academic institutions talking to each other and learning and collaborating with each other? And how do we as a field, right? Because we recognize the need for more of these centers, but how do we sort of sell that to others who say that your first priority is to enhance the capacity here on campus rather than thinking about enhancing capacity for others at different competitive schools, right?
Thank you so much, Erica. We did have just a very brief touch on this in terms of synergies, but not on the part that you are highlighting. And I'm going to check if Dr. Holtrap is able to join for a moment, because I know that she has been thinking a lot about how to strike a balance between serving the local needs, but also maintaining a national presence and pursuing those national level collaborations. So Jody, if you can do that, please jump in. Otherwise, I understand.
I can do it. I'm not sure how helpful I'll be because we're experiencing this issue of people have found us and they're really like, oh my gosh, DNI exists, that's a thing, and this could really help me with what I want to do. And so we have more people who want help than we have help to give, especially in our senior investigator ranks, and so it's a challenge. I mean, I think we're hiring, we're hopefully hiring, so I mean, hopefully we'll have more capacity, but it seems like it keeps going. I don't know that I have any great ideas. I think we all try to reserve a little bit of time for our own, areas of research and to build, the field, to try to identify a couple of things that each of us can do every year to work on that, but there's never enough time. I don't know. Does anyone else have a better answer? Because I would love it. I don't know what the answer is.
Thank you so much, Jody. I think that we struggle just, being about a year and almost a half old at UCSD, we started to struggle with the same issue. And my helper was knowing that you have already gone through this, several years ahead of us, and knowing that there is no easy answer to this. So we are not trying to solve this easily, but we have been including more and more colleagues with DNI expertise and training up those who have perhaps not come with originally might be mid-career, but they just started to do DNI, and now they are DNI consultants because they worked with us a little bit. So I think that the internal capacity building, people like Dr. Kribel who joined us, hopefully we can bring in new, fresh thoughts and people. Still, I would say that the balance between how much we give nationally, how much we give to people coming from other institutions, and how much we serve the local need has been a daily, if perhaps daily is an exaggeration, but certainly a monthly discussion for our center. So yeah. I know that we arrived at the top of the hour, and I am going to just thank, first of all, Ms. Viglione to be here. And actually today was a vacation day for her. So it's an extra thank you for her presenting to us, and all of you for the wonderful discussion. Please join us in the next room with Dr. Moore, who will be talking about more the implementer's perspective, and then we will move into the breakout session. So thank you for being here. Wonderful discussion. And John, if you are able to save the chat for us, we would really appreciate that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Borsika.